The shuttle hissed as it lifted off, vanishing into the gray haze above the towering forest canopy. The silence it left behind was immediate and crushing. Alien students stood scattered among moss-draped trees, their luminous helmets and elongated heads bobbing as they turned nervously in all directions. Twisting roots coiled beneath their feet like sleeping serpents, and a damp fog hugged the forest floor. The test had begun. Ava adjusted the strap of her canvas pack and exhaled quietly. She was the only human in the group, and while the others clustered in panicked huddles or barked instructions in their native dialects, she was already scanning the tree line. 6 hours. That was the time limit for Phase 1. Construct shelter before nightfall. The instructors had made it clear, no tech, no interference. Survival depended solely on instinct, resourcefulness, and willpower. An alien student, a sharp-limbed Trelkin with bioluminescent eyes, let out a high-pitched whine as it stumbled over a root. Others turned, snapping at it with irritation. The group was disintegrating, splintering into smaller factions of confusion. Some tried digging shallow pits with their claws, others awkwardly attempted to weave branches without structure or plan. The sound of cracking wood and frustrated screeches echoed through the clearing. Ava turned her back on them and walked toward a massive tree, its base thick with moss and gnarled roots the size of elephant bones. Its branches stretched high and wide, supporting a natural platform that would serve perfectly. She didn't hesitate. Kneeling, she pulled a flintstone from her belt pouch and began slicing through thick vines, selecting only those with the tensile strength needed for support. Her movements were efficient, shaped by years of practical training, not military, but her mother's obsessive belief in Earth survivalism. While the aliens had studied theoretical schematics for shelter design, Ava had built lean-tos during blizzards and caught rainwater in carved bark bowls before she could ride a bike. Behind her, a loud snap was followed by a chorus of panicked shrieks. A fragile frame of sticks collapsed atop 2 students, one of them now limping, its delicate leg joint bent the wrong way. Ava didn't flinch. She tied her first bundle of vines and began the slow climb, using natural notches in the bark to ascend 10 meters above the ground. The light dimmed as mist thickened in the upper layers of the forest, but she worked steadily, laying out the beginnings of a floor using sturdy branches and cross-lashing them with vine. The canopy would shield her from most rain, but she needed cover from the wind and nocturnal predators too. The aliens watched her from below, their confusion shifting toward curiosity. One, short, hunched, skin glimmering like wet stone, took a cautious step forward, blinking its 6 eyes as it tried to understand what she was doing. Ava said nothing. Explaining would waste breath and time. Instead, she threw down a piece of vine, not as an invitation, but a challenge. The alien caught it clumsily, then retreated. By the 3rd hour, the clearing had become a patchwork of disarray. Some students attempted to mimic her methods, creating crude platforms too close to the ground or poorly balanced. A few began to gather under large leaves, trembling as shadows moved in the distance. Something was stirring out there, predators perhaps, or just the forest's way of reminding them they didn't belong. Ava sat back briefly on her half-built floor, wiping sweat from her brow. The treehouse was taking shape, a raised platform secured at multiple points, an overhanging shelter made from woven fronds and moss. It wouldn't win beauty points, but it would hold. She struck her flint again and again, and finally, a spark caught in the dried bark shavings. Flames flickered to life inside a bark-lined bowl she'd hollowed earlier. Smoke curled upward like a signal. That got their attention. The aliens edged closer, drawn by the alienness of fire, primitive and sacred. Ava's expression remained unreadable, but she could feel the shift. They weren't dismissing her anymore. They were afraid, yes, but not just of the forest now. They feared being left behind. Her silent progress was proof of competence, and competence in a survival exam was power. The sun, barely visible through the mist, began its slow descent. With it came colder air and new sounds, clicks, distant howls, the whisper of something large brushing against distant foliage. The aliens huddled closer to Ava's tree, some looking up, others whispering in languages that bent the air oddly. Ava placed a chunk of bark on the fire to keep it going, then lashed down the final corner of her structure. The tree house stood finished, simple, sturdy, elevated. Safe. She sat on the edge and let her legs dangle, observing the students below. Some were still trying, dragging branches into piles. Others simply sat with glowing heads bowed. She took a deep breath and said the first words anyone had heard from her all day. "If you're not going to build something," she called down, voice clear and firm, "at least stay close to the tree tonight. Higher ground is safer." There was no argument, only quiet shuffling as a few students inched forward, reluctant but obedient. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The forest creaked around them, alive and watching. 6 hours had passed. Ava looked up into the darkening branches, then down again, where her fire's light reflected in 20 pairs of strange, luminous eyes. The test had just begun, but the lines were already drawn. Night draped the forest in silence, broken only by the subtle crackling of Ava's fire and the rustle of creatures unseen. Her treehouse, though modest, stood as the only real shelter in the clearing. Below, the alien students sat huddled near the base of the tree, sharing uneasy glances, their earlier panic subdued into exhausted stillness. Moisture clung to everything: hair, bark, bone. The mist hadn't lifted, only thickened with the darkness, turning the trees into silhouettes of giants and ghosts. Ava watched them from her perch, one knee drawn to her chest. The flames' flicker cast moving shadows across their elongated faces. Some tried to sleep, others merely stared into the branches above. None ventured far, not since the howls had begun, long, low sounds that rolled across the forest like breath through hollow stone. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was realization. This was not a simulation they could control with commands or escape through blinking transport pods. This was nature unbound. The firelight caught movement. A figure approached the base of the tree and looked up. Zern, one of the more composed students, a lean, gray-skinned being with forearms and a translucent cranial plate that shimmered in dim light, stepped forward and raised a hand. "Human," Zern said, voice soft but clipped, as though words were still foreign tools. "Your shelter. May we study it?" Ava's answer was silence at first. Then she nodded once. She wasn't interested in being their savior. But teaching? That she could tolerate if they earned it. Zern didn't climb, only observed. He circled the tree, eyeing the way the vines were tensioned, the spacing of the support beams, the triangulation of load-bearing joints. Ava could see the shift in his expression, recognition, maybe even respect. He said nothing more that night, but by dawn, he was fashioning bindings from twisted fronds and attempting to copy her structure alongside 2 others. By midday, a rhythm emerged. Ava worked in silence, reinforcing her roof with overlapping bark tiles. The rain had come briefly, not heavy, but enough to soak the ground and collapse whatever weak shelters the others had constructed. Those students now watched Zern's group, who in turn watched Ava, mimicking techniques but with growing awareness. Still, conflict stirred beneath the surface. Not all the students accepted her unspoken leadership. A group of 3 from the crystalline race, whose bodies refracted light in odd prismatic ways, had withdrawn from the main clearing. They distrusted her. One had whispered of a hidden supply cache, that perhaps the human had cheated. Ava overheard, but didn't react. She let suspicion run its course, knowing the forest would answer for her. By the 3rd hour, the sun hovered high and the heat steamed through the canopy. Ava descended briefly, inspecting the perimeter. Tracks something large had passed through the underbrush, bipedal, heavy. The prints were wide and deep, the moss crushed flat. She crouched beside them and ran her fingers along the edge. "Fresh. Predators," she muttered aloud. Her voice made a nearby student flinch. They were unused to her speech, as though it punctured a silence they had begun to mistake for peace. Zern approached, carrying a bundle of dry bark and sinew. "We have no weapons," he said. "No defenses if they return." "Then stay off the ground," she replied simply, and climbed back to her post. Her treehouse now had walls on 3 sides and a narrow doorway sealed with a woven mat of leaves. She had even fashioned a makeshift water collector using hollowed vines strung into a knotwork funnel. Inside, it was dry, shaded, safe. The sky dimmed earlier than expected. Clouds rolled in, thick and blue-gray, and the first rumble of thunder made the alien students stir. Rain returned, this time without mercy. It battered the forest in sheets, turning soil into sludge and tree trunks into glistening black towers. Most of the alien shelters disintegrated within minutes. Some students tried to cover themselves with wide leaves. Others simply curled into the roots and waited. Zern's structure held, barely. He shouted at his companions to brace it, to hold the ropes tight. 2 students from another species, small, spider-limbed creatures with shifting carapaces, darted toward Ava's tree, then hesitated under her gaze. She tossed them a length of vine from above. That night, the test became real. Lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating dozens of alien eyes in sharp blue-white flashes. One scream echoed from deeper in the woods, sharp, panicked, cut short. Whatever caused it never came into the clearing, but the message was clear. Survival was no longer theoretical. Inside her shelter, Ava pressed her back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. Her fire still burned in the hollow just below, flames shielded by a stone ring she'd built before the rain came. She heard no laughter, no chatter. Just the pulse of storm and the occasional sob muffled by bark. She hadn't planned on becoming the center of anything. She had signed up for this program to escape Earth's noise, to prove something to herself, not to lead a pack of alien cadets through a test they were destined to fail. But now they looked to her, not with desperation, but with the beginning of trust. The difference was subtle, but she saw it in the way they stood a little closer to her fire, in the way Zern deferred without asking for approval. The rain softened. A light breeze teased the trees, and mist began to rise once more, curling like breath from the forest's lips. Below, the students were still. Some slept, others kept watch. Ava shifted her weight and closed her eyes, just briefly. Her muscles ached, but her mind remained alert. Tomorrow they would need food, water, strategy. And if the test truly mirrored reality, it was going to get harder. Ava whispered to herself, a quiet anchor in the dark. Let's see who's still standing by the end. Sunlight pierced the morning mist in thin, golden beams, slicing through the canopy and illuminating the battered clearing below. Smoke rose gently from the remnants of Ava's fire, curling into the air like an offering. Around the base of her tree, the alien students were already stirring. Faces that had once displayed confusion and arrogance now bore something humbler, fatigue, perhaps, but also quiet resolve. No one had slept well, and every movement spoke of soreness and survival. Ava watched from her perch, one leg slung over the edge of her platform. Her shelter had held. The others had not. Of the original 22 students, 4 were missing, either fled, failed, or swallowed by the forest. The remaining 18 had gathered closer to her tree, as if proximity alone could protect them. Zern emerged from beneath a crude lean-to, visibly soaked but still standing. He carried an improvised tool, something between a spear and a walking stick, bound with vine and tipped with a sharpened shard of bark. He stopped at the base of Ava's tree and looked up. Movement near the southern ridge, he reported. Something watching us. Ava nodded once. She'd expected as much. The predators hadn't struck last night, but they had circled. The forest was too quiet this morning. Even the birds, the insects, silent. She descended without a word, landing with a soft thud beside Zern. The students gathered instinctively, forming a loose semicircle. No one questioned her presence anymore. We can't hold position here, she said, eyes sweeping the weary crowd. Not without proper defenses. And some of you still have nothing resembling shelter. If it storms again tonight, you won't make it. A young, reptilian student raised a trembling claw. Where do we go? There's a higher ridge northwest, Ava answered. Less undergrowth. Better sight lines. We can rebuild there properly this time. But we move as one group. There were no protests. That alone told her how much they'd changed. The march began cautiously. Zern led the forward scouts, Ava shadowing the rear, eyes sharp for signs of movement. They moved in silence, stepping over roots, through puddles, past vines that clung like hungry fingers. A fallen branch snapped under someone's foot, and half the group flinched. Ava raised a hand, signaling stillness. Out of the mist ahead, a shape loomed. Everyone froze. It stood 7 feet tall, bipedal, its skin a leathery gray-black, slick with moisture. Its eyes were small and deep-set, its chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm. It didn't charge, didn't flee. It simply stared. Ava stepped forward, slowly drawing the fire-hardened staff she'd strapped to her back. She didn't raise it. She just held it loosely, letting the creature see it. Then, without a sound, the creature turned and vanished into the trees. The group exhaled as one. Ava remained still for another 10 seconds, listening. Then she turned. "We keep moving." By mid-morning, they reached the ridge. The slope was steep but manageable, the top dotted with strong, evenly spaced trees, perfect for elevated shelters. Ava chose the central tree again. The others followed suit, not clustering around her now but spreading out, echoing her designs. This time, she didn't work alone. Zern's team had learned quickly, and others followed their lead. Vines were harvested efficiently, branches sorted by weight and purpose. One of the insectoid students discovered that dried bark from a certain tree species repelled the nocturnal insects that had tormented them the night before. It shared the find without prompting. By midday, half the students had functioning platforms. Ava's fire was already built, crackling with a steady rhythm. Water was filtered through moss-lined funnels. Progress was no longer a struggle, it was instinctive. The instructor's drone descended as quietly as a falling leaf. A sphere of polished metal and glowing seams, it hovered near Ava's platform, recording everything. A voice echoed from it, neutral and synthetic. Phase 1, evaluation complete. Survivors, 18. Metrics assessed, shelter integrity, cooperation, leadership, adaptation. Preliminary distinction, Ava Reyes. All heads turned toward her. Ava didn't look up from the sphere she was shaping, but her hand paused briefly. Instructor Mix will arrive shortly for field debrief, the voice added. The drone rose and disappeared into the trees. Ava finished sharpening the spear. "Get your shelters finished," she said, standing. "This isn't over." When Mix arrived, a crustacean-like creature in a reinforced hoversuit, he said nothing at first. He simply walked the perimeter, his compound eyes clicking softly. He noted the elevated shelters, the efficient layout, the fire, the collected water. The students stood in respectful silence, their eyes shifting between him and Ava. Finally, he stopped at the center and turned. On most planets, intelligence is measured by invention. Here, we test for something more ancient, instinct. You're sent into this forest not to prove your species' superiority, but your adaptability. Most of you failed to understand that at first. One of you understood it from the start. He looked at Ava. "Miss Reyes, you constructed a complete shelter in 5 hours, with no assistance. You maintained fire overnight, shared survival techniques without exerting dominance, and inspired structure through action, not instruction. You didn't ask to lead. You became one because others followed." Ava didn't respond. Zern stepped forward, eyes shining under his cranial plate. "We would not be standing here if not for her." Others murmured their agreement. Mix's voice softened. "Your test continues. But if you survive to the final day, Ava Reyes, you will leave this forest with highest honors and with every one of your peers in your debt." The instructor departed as quickly as he had arrived. Ava exhaled slowly, feeling the weight settle deeper on her shoulders. She didn't want their gratitude, only their effort. She climbed her platform again and looked down at the forest, vast and quiet and far from finished with them. Below, the students returned to their work with renewed purpose. The sun glinted off their tools, off their skin, off the rising frames of new shelters. Ava leaned back, letting the breeze touch her face. The real test, she knew, wasn't survival. It was whether they could become something more than survivors.